thanks very much for staying with us for the whole afternoon. So this is our very last session of the day, and you'll be delighted to know that in 45 minutes we have drinks and a reception outside for those of you who are able to stay. So we have our final institutional briefing, and I'm going to pass over to my colleague from the University of Glasgow, Ilud Kibuchi, who's going to chair this session.
Thank you. So our first speaker will be Richard Quilliam from University of Stirling.
Thank you.
Let's just check we get our extra minute. No, that's not. It's not. Do you mind if we switch order?
Oh,
Thank you so much. Sorry,
That's
Tracy.
not fair.
Sorry. It's actually Hamlet for you afterwards. Yeah.
I've had enough of that already.
So then our next speaker will be Tracy Morse, yeah, University of Strathclyde.
The much more attractive Tracy Morse. I say that because I know Richard well. That's how I get away with that. So I'm neither going to rap or probably be entertaining, but I am probably going to win the prize for the most maps. So there we go. So just to give a little bit, like some have said, a lot of this is going to be repetition, things we've heard from other people reiterating some of the points that have been made. But just to, let's hope it works. Yes. To kind of give a bit of an overview to start with. So obviously as Strathclyde, we're very known for our technology, but we also have lots of other fabulous HAS faculties and business school faculty as well, and very much are honing in over the last few years on our inter and transdisciplinary ways of working and bringing that into our technology development as well. We have these many strategic areas of research that we cover, and those cover not only our international development, but also our local and our European engagements as well. In terms of our international development, we have a number of different funding sources, and these again are not new to ones that we've seen from other speakers earlier on today. A lot of these have come across our 4 faculties. As I said, more and more of these we're trying to extend beyond being within one faculty and cutting across different ones. It's probably fair to say that a lot of our work has primarily focused in the African region so far, but we are seeing a kind of steady shift towards working more and more in ODA countries. And I wanted to give a couple of examples of some of the work that we're particularly proud of at Strathclyde before then focusing in on what we're doing with the ISPF funds at the moment. So Strathclyde are very proud of the fact that we've been working with Malawi now for many years, but particularly I think in higher education links for the last 30 years. And that initially came back to, the usual. Somebody turns up in someone's office and says, we need some help with an environmental health degree, please. And a nice colleague from Strathclyde said, that sounds like fun. Let's go and do that together. So that's where that established, expanded into education as well. And really over the last few years has had significant funding in from Scottish Government, International Development Fund, as well as FCDO and more recently the UKRI and NIHR as well. We work with a really wide range of stakeholders, so primarily with government, but also with different NGOs, civil society and organisations there as well. And not only that, I think coming to one of Mary's points, not just with our Global South partners, but also with European and US partners and other institutions from across the UK too. Key to all of this, and again, maybe touching on what Mary really emphasised, is that these partners have very much been long-term for us. So 30 years is a long time, and people have come and gone throughout those partnerships, but we've maintained that kind of trusted relationship with the institutions that we work in with Malawi. And we've done that also through working in Malawi-led priorities, so areas that the government of Malawi or our institutions are prioritising as well. And that's also what gives us, and I'm sure is the same for many in the room, our great success in terms of impact. So in terms of uptake of that evidence into policy, into practice for NGOs as well, is the fact that it is framed in what people actually need in a practical sense. Wherever we work in Malawi, we also build in that element of capacity bridging and building as well. And I think, as colleagues pointed out, very much learning from our Global South partners as much as we are learning, transferring knowledge into our Malawian colleagues as well, and really helping to build that research environment. I think that's been key to our relationship and helping to strengthen, for example, the Washtead Centre around water and sanitation, where I work, and making that into its own centre of excellence within Malawi too. Particularly at the moment, we work in energy in Malawi, renewable energy. If anybody needs any expertise in that, point you in the direction of colleagues, particularly through the Global Renewable Centre that's funded by Scottish Government and stretches not only from Malawi, but also Zambia and Rwanda. And in our health space, a bit like Aberdeen, we also have an NIHR Global Health Research Group on adolescent health and wellbeing, but focused in Malawi. And that brings together our joint expertise on public health, sexual reproductive health rights, looking at education and our health systems and things as well. So trying to build on what are the strengths that our Global South partners bring, where are the gaps that we can bring in, and build a team that can tackle those together. Our other area, which you've heard about from Bernie already today, is the One Ocean Hub, which was a UKRI GCRF funded hub. It really was there to recognise the essential role that the ocean plays, not only in our future of having oxygen and not, and managing to mitigate against climate change, but also about the relationship that human beings have with that ocean as well. So whether those communities that rely on it for livelihoods or for us as a food source. And it was really there to bridge those disconnections between the law, science, and policy, and those governance frameworks that are needed to make sure that everyone's voices are heard. It brought in partners not only from the UK, but also South Africa, Namibia, Ghana, Fiji, and the Solomon Islands, and they've got incredibly transformative work that they've done. Pippin, who's over here, wave your hand, Pippin, can tell you much more about how that worked. And I think one of the key things for both funders and for researchers is this was a huge consortia, and they spent significant time pulling people together, having conversations about how that partnership should work and what it should look like. There have been challenges, I know, and huge successes, and I think it's something that can really be learned about how we work going forward as well. All right, so first map, there we go. So one of the ways we're moving forward at Strathclyde is we have put in place now, more recently, regional leads. Regional leads in each area are people who have been embedded in that region for some period of time, so have a good understanding of working in that area or originate from that region as well. They work closely with our research and knowledge exchange staff, wave your hand, Carrie, there we go, who are there to kind of support. And we're really there to support the effective relationship. So a lot of those bridge building, understanding what the challenges are, working in that region, what kind of things you need to think about as you go forward. That's what these regional coordinators are there to help with. There we go. Okay, so looking at the ISPF programme, so we focused on the 4 key areas, ideally trying to look at proposals that are as cross-cutting as possible for those. At the moment, we've had 2 internal calls for funding, and we've funded 17 different projects across those. And there's a pump priming call also underway at the moment. The programmes funded so far, there we go, are to really trying to look at a range of areas, but kind of trying to summarise what those look like. We're building and really looking at existing, and I think people have touched upon this earlier, the importance of this fund in terms of really accelerating and building strengths and maintaining those trusted relationships have been really, really valuable in there. And also helping those relationships to look at the horizon, what's coming up the line, what could be potentially used in the future to build those as well. Also looking at those new opportunities that are out there, building capacity in our research partners so that they can be the leads in the future, and also using those to build South-South partnerships as well as much as we can. Back to maps. So if we look at round 1, Although again, primarily in Africa, a lot of we have had projects out in East Java and Indonesia. We've been looking at waste management, particularly around behaviour change mechanisms, so very transferable research across there. And then across West, Southern, East Africa, we've really built, as I said, upon those existing partnerships and helping to drive them forward. It's like third click's a charm, isn't it? Thanks, Mary. Okay, so then looking at round two, these projects are just getting started at the moment. So again, the majority are based around the African region, continuing around things like themes of waste management, education, health and well-being. So we have a couple of projects up in West Africa and cutting across several countries. In Zambia, we're working with more the government authorities in that situation, where we're looking at mapping energy use for future development and infrastructure, and also looking at digital skills. And then looking across to Malawi, our favourite at Strathclyde. Here we building on our track record here again in the energy sector, so building on that long relationship there, and also looking at new opportunities around climate resilient construction using natural fibres. And then we've got new partnerships as well, which are building up across Asia and across South Africa and Sudan. And those are going to be looking at things like climate adaptation, livelihoods development across agriculture, entrepreneurship and fisheries. If you want to know more about entrepreneurship, Carolyn is over here. Okay, so just to summarise, I'm really sorry, I completely forgot to look at you. Our extensive work with African collaborators has really been a great journey. We've learned a lot, and we've done a lot of things wrong, and we've managed to make things right now. And I think we have a really good blueprint for how we work with those partners. One Ocean Hub, our NHR programme, worked with a code of conduct that has taken time to develop between those partners. I think it's really important from a funding perspective to make sure that time is built in to any research, so that we have those agreements and collaborations and we're all on the same page. Great, and I will stop there. Apologies.
Thank you, Tracy. So our next speaker is Vicky Johnson.
Oh, is it?
From,
I'm not the last.
yeah, and then we can
And then we'll
come.
do the slide.
Yes.
Am I the last? Am
Uh,
I? Oh, it is.
From the University of the Highlands and Islands.
Yeah, thanks. I thought I was the last, so I'm not. I haven't got the total graveyard spot. That's brilliant. So yeah, I'm a professor at the University of the Highlands and Islands, and I direct the Centre for Living Sustainability, and that is social sciences and arts and humanities and based at Inverness. But I thought I ought to situate. I thought I ought to situate people as to what UHI is. So it is it's a partnership across the Highlands and Islands, and you've heard already from our wonderful Sams over there, and they are at the bottom left, and I am at Inverness. And it's a set of partnerships right the way across the Highlands and Islands. We are a tertiary education institute, so that goes from 16 all the way up to PhD students. So although a lot of our work is in the Highlands and Islands, we do have a lot of collaborations internationally, and this is just an example of a map from Unit of Assessment 25 Area Studies, just to show that actually there are a lot of partners in the Global South. A lot of our work also looks north and works in the Arctic and across Europe. We are quite heavily affected by Brexit and the loss of some of our European funding, but we are trying to access that now. So the third click, maybe. I don't know why this is happening. I'll keep clicking. So I just did focus on the GCRF and the institutional support through, of GCRF funding, because that's what I thought I was meant to do. So basically, I think it's really important to say that in talking to colleagues and in talking to executive office as well, there was a more structured programme of international development research during that period of funding. Partnerships may be unfunded but have continued. Some of those GCRF projects are really important parts of our last REF, the last 2 REF submissions actually. And other various academics across the partnership have sought different types of funding from philanthropic trusts, UKRI, etc. So I'm going to go through some of the GCRF first, just to give you an example of some of the range of different funding. This is the only slide with writing on, okay? The rest is pictures, because I thought I was last. So just to say that there's a big range, so this is just examples from a couple of years. So what we do in the Highlands and Islands is we very much work across global contexts and learn from each other. So for example, working on minority languages, you know, in Scotland, Ireland and India. So it is very much learning between the partners as opposed to sort of trying to take our learning and impose it on anyone. There's the Archipelago Adventure. You know, it looks, when you get all the pictures in, that everyone's been sitting on tropical islands, but actually a lot of these projects have actually really led to important impact, which has been evidenced, and indeed we were pretty good at our impact case studies in the last research excellence framework. So just a few examples. This project, which was partnering with Royal University of Bhutan, our professors of education, Keith Smythe, Maura Redford, and also Rural Development, Fred Rene. This has been an ongoing relationship. So past the GCRF funding, it's continued, and it continues to be an important part of our research-informed teaching. It was an important part of our entry-level education unit for assessment 23. Another example, Polynesian Roots and Roots project in the Cook Islands. So working with the government of the Cook Islands to actually understand the living heritage. So archaeologists working with historians, working with social scientists to actually understand the root around some of the Cook Islands, which are made from crumbled coral. And then they're a really important part of that heritage, and actually making it living and making it part of the government policy in terms of tourism and national identity. So one I did myself about living on the edge of society. So following up from a UN Girls Education Initiative, a piece of work with Pentekeso Letu in Kenya, in the slums of Nairobi. We then got some GCRF funding, and having to work remotely, the team of youth researchers followed up with young women and understood their experiences of the pandemic. So those are some examples. I think there's one more, Culture Vultures. So this was also GCRF, and it was looking at the impact of veterinary medicines on vultures in Bangladesh and Pakistan. And ALPS is an action learning program set that I run for experienced researchers across the university. So now those scientists from the Environment Resources Institute up in Thurso are working with arts and humanities and cultural community psychologists to actually follow up on some pilot work in Nepal to look at how the science and the social science and the humanities kind of interacts. And that's a project just going ahead now. So these GCRF projects actually led to a lot more. I'm just going to talk about a bit of other, smattering of other research, and I've stuck to lower and middle income countries. Just to say that the British Council is a really important source of funding for us, and we have work going on in India at the moment with the KC Valley project, supporting universities to do stakeholder mapping and to learn from different techniques and to bring the techniques that they're using to the Highlands, actually, to the Highlands and Islands. So that's one example. And then in Sri Lanka, actually training SMEs and working with local incubators in Sri Lanka. And then we got ecosystem funding from the British government. And the second training is in Orkney. And we went to Orkney, Shetland and Skye. And so we're doing similar things across global contexts and learning. And we have a whole spectrum of different types of research, some of which would lie in the realm of KE and entrepreneurship, and some more in research excellence. So we do quite a lot of research capacity building across the university. So we try to encourage ECRs and people just getting into research to come on the journey. So people have talked a lot about learning from our research in the Global South and from our partners. For my period of time out of academia, which is most of my life in international NGOs, working with these extraordinary partners who have really fantastic ways of working in their local communities and the kind of participatory and creative methodologies, youth-led walks in the earthquake region of Nepal, through to poetic inquiry, through to different forms of mapping with or without paper and objects and on the ground. But also really not just learning from them and having equitable partnerships for development there, it's for here. So we actually use a lot of those techniques from the Global South in the Highlands and Islands. So we work with the Scottish Prison Service at the moment, and we're developing, I'm coming to the end, and some of the work we do, for example, with local organisations on inclusive research with families with disability, we've learnt from our partners in the Global South. I'm coming to the end. I just wanted to say we also have a programme of work across child and youth rights and intergenerational justice, and you can get more information on that from Googling www.rejuvenate.global. That's with the Institute of Development Studies. And we have collaborative doctoral programmes, for example, in South Africa. And we have various different doctoral and master's programmes who come to visit, because people love to come to the Highlands and Islands. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So now our last speaker for this session is Richard.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Okay, so I think it's just me that's standing between you and the end. I don't think I'm going to say anything that hasn't been said before, really. It's just different pictures. Okay, so the vision of the University of Stirling is to be an international university with a global reputation for innovative and interdisciplinary research. And to do this, we have three main research themes at the university: cultures, communities and society, global security and resilience, and living well. And by very definition, all of those research themes require overseas development. Okay. Here's my map, and this is demonstrating current and recent projects at the University of Stirling, everything from crop protection in Brazil to fisherwomen in the mangroves of South Sierra Leone, to improving micronutrient intake for adolescent girls in Bangladesh, to tobacco and alcohol abuse and policy in South America and Africa. So obviously I haven't got time to talk about all of these projects, so I'm just going to go the wrong way. Just going to give you a flavour of some of the research going on at Stirling. So we have the biggest institute of aquaculture, probably the only institute of aquaculture in the UK, where for the last few decades there has been literally tens, if not hundreds, of research projects all around the world improving productivity and management of aquaculture resources as an essential food security and livelihood agenda. So, for example, in Ghana, where 60% of protein intake comes from fish, researchers at Stirling have improved the productivity of the aquaculture systems in Ghana, which has resulted in over 500,000 new employment opportunities and economic development, and also around 2 million people with improved food security as a direct result of aquaculture. Similarly, in Mexico, researchers have improved and increased the efficiency and productivity of aquaculture, particularly in rural areas, which has contributed to around $9 million annually from aquaculture business and trade. One at a time. There we go. So all of those of you who've been to Africa or Asia are very aware of how dangerous the roads can be. I'm sure you've all had white knuckle rides before on the roads, but particularly for pedestrians, cyclists and motorcyclists, it's a real dangerous situation being on the road. In fact, it's the 8th highest or ranked 8th globally in the ranking for deaths. It's road deaths. And so this Safe Roads Africa project aims to tackle this issue in Zambia and Malawi by a participatory and co-development system for understanding where hotspots of accidents are and being able to work with the community to decrease these hotspots, but also train people to be first responders to road accidents and to help rehabilitation of people who've been affected by road accidents before. Okay, so perinatal mental illness, PMI, is a massive global health challenge, particularly for disproportionately for women who are already vulnerable for one reason or another. And so in areas of the world, particularly Southeast Asia, perinatal mental illness is just not accepted, not culturally or socially accepted. And so women undergoing this condition are stigmatized and blamed, and this has knock-on consequences for both them and their child. So researchers at Stirling have formed a network in Malaysia, Indonesia and Thailand to train local health practitioners about this illness, to try and break down some of this stigma in a culturally appropriate way. One of the other things that we're globally renowned for at Stirling is our work on conservation and environmental and ecological sciences, particularly how that's related to public health. And so one particular study I'm going to talk about here is the sort of very last dying remnants of a GCRF project with about a year left to run, funded by NERC. The Spaces project is tackling plastic pollution in informal settlements and slum areas in Malawi and Tanzania. So our vision here is to demonstrate to governments and local communities that plastic pollution is much more than just an environmental issue or a waste management issue, as much of this plastic is colonized by pathogens, particularly things like cholera, salmonella, E. coli. They bind these plastics and they persist in these environments for a long time afterwards. So this is still an ongoing study of the environmental health impacts. So I just want to finish by focusing on how we used our allocation from the SFC for the ISPF ODA money. So we funded 7 projects with 11 partners, and we had a real focus on including early career researchers within these projects. It was almost a criteria, whether that was an ECR from Stirling or an ECR from the partner institute. And many of the things that have been said already is how we use this money. So for capacity building, including new partners on projects. Often the projects have been completely damaged by the lockdown or the ODA cuts. And so they evolved and took a new direction. And so new partners were an obvious thing to include. So there's engagement activities, co-development of a number of different projects. And the last point here is the launch of a new research network, which is one of the case studies I just want to finish with. And so as has been mentioned several times today, it's really important north-south knowledge exchange, but equally as important is south-south knowledge exchange and that capacity building between colleagues within particular defined areas. And something that I was noticing in my research was there was this lack of connectivity between academics, specifically between academics in Africa in this particular example. And you were seeing the same project, almost identically the same project happening in the same country, but the people had no idea the other project was occurring. And I've even seen the same project occurring in the same city in Dar es Salaam, a couple of miles away from each other. They had no idea it was going on. And so we started this network that was designed for academics specifically. So within our grants, when we write them, we include lots of NGOs and lots of non-academic stakeholders, which is absolutely as it should be. But in my opinion, that does sometimes dilute the connectivity between academics and between the knowledge exchange between academics. So we used some of the money to start this network, the African Planetary Health and Plastic Pollution Network, which is a pan-African network, all 54 African countries. So we did a huge search for African academics working within this area, which was a lot harder than it sounds. People don't advertise themselves on the internet. But we eventually got about 260 African participants within the network, covering about 60% of the continent. I've just come back a couple of weeks ago from the first symposium, where we had representation from about 11 African countries, all sitting around a table, specifically discussing context-specific solutions to the planetary health and plastic pollution issue in Africa. So that's where I want to leave it. I will leave you with a picture of our beautiful campus at Stirling, and thank you very much.
So now I will request the panelists to sit down, and then you can have 1 or 2 questions there. Any question? Okay, so yes.
I just want to ask about this waste management. Is there a concrete way of teaching these countries how to get rid of your waste? Because our context in Pakistan is, dumps as piles. It's anywhere just outside, and it's not good. It's not healthy for the environment or for the people. So, what can we teach these countries to manage their waste appropriately?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a great question, and I can see a lot of people looking a bit like, oh God, he's going to go on for ages. So I think that the problem is that there are so many projects that have done the same thing and are still doing the same thing, and it's in this country we had the Blue Planet a few years ago, where David Attenborough showed pictures of whales and turtles and birds in great distress having eaten plastic, trying to use the same incentive for African governments, for example. It just doesn't work. There's far more important things than dying turtles or fish or birds. And so we need a system where we can put it up the agenda, make it more important, because environmental quality is just not on the agenda. And so, as I just said, we found that these plastics are absolutely covered in pathogens. They're a real public health risk. And if we can demonstrate to governments that, this is a public health issue and it's something that needs investment and proper enforcement to tackle, that hopefully that will work. The problem's not law. In Tanzania, for example, has some fantastic legislation for waste management. It is completely against the law to throw any sort of rubbish in the environment. There's loads of environmental legislation, but no enforcement, absolutely no enforcement whatsoever, which is why you see it everywhere. So we need to get to the next stage. We've got the law. We just need to find what it is that incentivizes people. And I'm putting all my eggs in the basket of public health and pathogens.
I'm just going to say it can sometimes help. I mean, I was in Ethiopia and we were just walking along and we started to pick up plastic bottles and even the team were going, "What are you doing?" I was going, "I'm just picking up the plastic bottles. That's what we do on the beach and then up in the Highlands." And actually just starting to do it and starting to do these things and work together on them is actually also a really good idea. I mean, I wasn't going to say anything, but I suddenly thought of that moment.
Yeah, with time, I have just one question for the panelists. Okay, we understand that in most of these countries we are working, we are building the research capacity for researchers, but also we understand that there's a context in which the research governance offices are not really weak. So what aspect or what strategies do you make to ensure that not only are you building the research capacity, but also the strengthening the research office governance?
I think one of the things we do, well, there are two things that we do probably as Strathclyde, because when we have long-term relationships with institutions, we already have that kind of bilateral engagement where we talk to people, understand what their priorities are, what their needs are, and try and build that into the relationship. But also, I think we have an inherent responsibility within our funding applications to make sure things like good research practice, helping put in resource to help build capacity within research support offices and things are within there as well. And it's maybe something that kind of gets neglected because, there's never enough money in a funding application to do everything you'd want to. But unless we strengthen those elements, then that's when the research challenges start coming in later on as those relationships too. So we find a lot of benefit in building those resources into funding applications as well to try and do that. And I think more funders are looking for that as well now as we go forward.
Yeah, I mean, time and resources for co-construction are really, really important from the earliest stage possible. But I would say it's not really capacity building, again, in a one-way kind of, it's bi-directional because people are experts of their own lives and their communities. And we need to learn. We need to be really open to learning from people. And I've got a 1 minute thing on even my oh my goodness. Anyway, so I think more co-construction from an early time and recognizing that people understand their communities. In 2 teams in Ethiopia and Nepal on my last ESRC project, we had 2 members of the team who were street connected young people, and they knew how to communicate with local people so much better. In a way, I mean, quite often you are even redundant. You should stay at home because you're going to change the results. People have their gifts and their contributions, and actually they're all equally important.
Thank you, everyone. So now I will first sit down.
Great. Thank you very much for the panel. I know that secretly you all appreciate us keeping really strict time limits on things. So without further ado, we're going to pass over to our final speaker, who is Marcel Jaspers, former chair of the Royal Society of Edinburgh's Africa Working Group.
Thank you very much. And I realise I've got a tough ask to summarise everything in 5 minutes, so I'll do my best. we've had a great day. I think it's been some great discussions, some great ideas, and I see people building connections all over the place. It's nice to be back in person doing this. I think besides sharing success that we've seen today as well, we need to share the challenges a little bit more so we can learn from each other as to how we should overcome these challenges. And I know that Mary was going to try and do something about research professionals and how to get them together to learn from each other as to how to overcome these challenges. But so I'm going to summarize the day in 3 main points. The one is on ethics and governance. The second one is on long-term engagement. The third one is on continuing forming those networks and communication. So under ethics and governance, I've simply written values and trust, the kind of things we need to build between communities in order to continue with this type of work at a high level. And I've heard it mentioned many times in different ways. The other one is this idea of equity and partnerships, making sure that we keep that in mind whenever we do whatever we do, and build it in right from the very start, even before we start at times. And those social considerations of how you do something. We had a great example just now from one of our speakers, where you rely on the people who live there to be able to do the work that they do best. And I think that's important to recognize that contribution. And that leads again to the idea of co-creation of research. Now, we need to see longer term engagement. We've seen projects today that have been successful over a period of up to 30 years, if not longer at times. And the reason for that is that you have to build up those relationships over time. And again, there's all kinds of words that come around this co-creation word. Mutual mentoring is the kind of thing that we like to see, where both sides learn from each other. And there's this term in the UN language called needs assessment, where you often talk about what is it really that the people who live there need out of the research. That long-term funding is essential over time, because that cliff edge is very difficult to cope with. I've seen it so many times that a really good project gets cut off halfway through because of the lack of long-term funding. And I think there's some things we've heard today, some innovative processes. We heard from the Wellcome Trust about their idea of funding local research councils in Africa. And I guess that there are other initiatives like that too. So it might be, for instance, that assisting research councils in parts of the world which don't have a stable funding system, in order to allow them to build up their own research infrastructure and to show that you can solve local problems with local resources and local people. Finally, that idea of communicating the right way and continuing to form those networks. I think today's shown us we need to coordinate better. I think we can cooperate and collaborate. We've seen all the kind of things that we're doing. I think the Royal Society of Edinburgh is trying to do something on a small scale to show that there are projects in Scotland that could work together if they knew about each other. And again, the final point was made by somebody earlier this morning is this idea of improving the way we communicate our outputs. So the first thing would be, for instance, make sure you have the right impact, but communicate to the right audience using the right platform in the right language. And we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. So it's been a really fantastic day. I'm sure all of you have, like me, come away with lots of ideas, lots of new contacts and networks, but also a kind of opportunity to foster old partnerships. On behalf of the University of Glasgow, thank you so much for coming. We're really committed to this wider community and been really delighted to have a chance to bring people together today, something we hope we might be able to do again in the future. I'd like to thank Mary Ryan from the University of Glasgow for helping to organise the event today. Mary. And from the Scottish Funding Council, Hazel McGraw and Bethan Adams for helping to just bring us all together and finally, to all of our speakers, to all of our session chairs and everyone who travelled here today, thanks very much for making the effort and staying with us. So we now have some refreshments for those of you who are able to stay around for a little bit, and I won't keep you from them. Thank you very much.